What is happening, everybody? Welcome into an all-new episode of the Pack-A-Day Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow my guest at Mike Wahle 68. You know him. He's the absolute best. Joins us pretty much every single Friday, certainly during the season. Mike, it is great to be talking Packers with you once again. How are you doing?
Andy, I'm doing great. Fun to be on the show as always. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, I appreciate you as well. I didn't exactly know where to start with this one, specifically because it felt like a lot of the things that specifically you and I have kind of been over the last, I don't even know how long now, are sort of the exact same things that plagued the team in this specific game. So let me just start by asking you, is there anything different that you noticed in this game that plagued the Packers in a different way, something that they did different? Any other different takeaways, or is this basically the same formula for losing that they've had over the course of the past few weeks?
Yeah, that's a great way to frame it, because I was watching the game. Like, I was going through my notes again this morning. I was doing our show, and it just, everything that they should have taken care of, or at least not taken care of, but should have addressed in the bye week. You're like, well, this is all the same stuff. This is absolutely, this is death by a thousand paper cuts. Like, this is, it's almost unwatchable, because they just keep having the same fundamental technical issues, running the wrong routes, fitting in the wrong lanes, blocking poorly, not getting off on the snap. It's just so much. You're just going, what? How is this possible that you keep running the same stuff? The conclusion I came to is this. I said this morning on our show. My big takeaway is that you're putting trust into players who haven't earned your trust yet.
Yeah.
And I'm probably not talking about Jordan Love, because Jordan Love's been there for 4 years. I trust that he knows the offense. Whether Matt LaFleur is letting him check things at the line of scrimmage, what kind of freedom he's given him is certainly different than Aaron. But that's kind of a quarterback head coach or a quarterback play caller deal. I'm talking about the rest of the people on the offense, the young receivers, the young tight ends, some of these offensive linemen that just aren't producing. As you know, I think this was one of the worst blocked games up front that I've seen. To be fair, I mean, especially given the level of competition. And so this was really bad all around. The defense it's hard because the defense does worse than you expect to, but then they only give up 19 points. And, for me, like, the threshold for John Fox told us when I was my first year there, he's like, if you score 20, you're going to win, because we don't give up more than 20 points. And so I've always kind of stuck in my head, like, a good defensive team should give up less than 20. And if you score 20, because we used to score 27, 28 in Green Bay.
Yeah.
But if you score more than 20, like, you should win every game. And if you're not, then you start nitpicking a defense that, they're not great. They're not as good as the 7th, 8th, or 8 first round draft picks that they have. Like, they're not good, but they're not nearly as bad as the record shows.
It's so funny. I said almost verbatim, like, the defense is just meh. And that's like the best thing we can say about this team right now is the defense it's meh. You don't feel great about it. You don't feel terrible about it. I know some people feel terrible about it. I don't feel terrible about it, but it's just meh. It's average. It's fine. It's whatever. But the thing that frustrates me still, even about the defense, and just kind of what tells me what I need to know, because sometimes teams will play to their competition, or sometimes, like, the games are just kind of their own individual thing. But what I've kind of needed to know of, like, all right, is the defense good enough? And because we can look at the points per game and be like, all right, some of these games, like you said, the offense plays a little bit better and they should win. But I go back to the Saints game and I go to this game and really the Falcons game as well. Falcons game, you got a 12-point lead and the defense can't, get off the field on 3 consecutive scoring drives. The Saints game, Green Bay takes the lead and the Saints offense with a backup quarterback goes right down the field and they get a 43-yard field goal. Now, great that they missed the 43-yard field goal, but the offense goes right down the field on them, gets in very makeable field goal range, just happens to be a miss. And then in this game, Green Bay's offense takes the lead. What does the opposing offense do? They go right down in the field. It's a 50-some yard attempt. It's not an easy one, but they get in field goal range and they've got an opportunity to win the game. It's like, even a defense that I'm mostly with you, that, like, it's probably not anywhere close to the biggest of Green Bay's problems right now. They've had opportunities too, where, like, they just get off the field 1 or 2 of these times. It makes it a whole heck of a lot easier. And it's hard to put a ton of faith in them in key situations either.
Yeah. I'm not a huge stats guy, but there's 3 stats that I thought were interesting. One is they're 30th in the league in giving up yards per game rushing. They're 144 yards a game, 143.7. They're 27th in takeaways.
Yeah.
That's really bad. I mean, so like one of these things has to improve. And then I didn't realize this, but to your point, we're 27th in time of possession.
Yeah.
And so that's a two-way street. But you start going, okay, time of possession. Like our passing numbers aren't that bad. It's because they can run the ball against us. So you're 30th in the league in rushing yards. You're 27th in takeaways. And you start going, well, okay, that really is a bad, like that's not numbers that suggest because what happens, like to your point, if the game's close all the time, or if you're winning, or if you're losing, then you're not necessarily going to give up more points because the other, like you're not opening up the defense, like the playbook's still condensed, and you're not just trying to put points on the board, and you know the offensive play caller is not just like no holds barred, let's just go for it. So it probably is worse than the numbers suggest in a lot of those, but 4.5 yards a carry, 144 yards a game on the ground, like that's unacceptable. And then I think we're -2 in takeaways or the turnover margin, and it's just you look at everything and you watch the play on the field, and there's guys that there's good players on this team. I keep going back to this. There's players on this team that have played better than they're playing right now, and there's players on this team that are I can just tell because I've been in football for 3 decades. There's players on the team are just not playing to the level of their capability. And that is, I would be, if I was in the organization, if I was part of this locker room or part of this coaching staff, that's what I would be most disappointed in.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. I think some players like John Runyon Jr. was playing so much better 2 years ago than he is right now. I think Elton is not 100% right now, which is part of the reason. But even him, I would say, not playing to where he was prior to his injury a couple years ago. I don't think Jair is where he was at and obviously he's hurt right now too. But there's multiple players on this team where I think we've seen them on the field play a much better version of football than they're playing right now. It's hard to point to much else than coaching. I know players have to kind of handle themselves too and continue to get better on their own, but it's hard.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with the coaching part. Here's what I'd say. Everybody says this when you're on the field and you have a Hall of Fame quarterback. Oh, you guys just wait because you're not that good. Yeah. And a lot of one of the reasons that I wanted to leave is I want to show everybody that I'm good without him.
Yeah.
I'm good without this system. You're good when you're not. And that's something that guys that are in systems with Hall of Fame quarterbacks, like when they go somewhere else, they realize, oh, wow, the world's a whole different place out here without a Hall of Fame quarterback. Because, you know, like the Mike McCarthy narrative after the Super Bowl was that they got a little lazy. They got a little, not lazy, but they got complacent with everything because they were just like, Aaron's going to take care of it. And you see that fall off in production from other players when they go to other teams. And what you're seeing right now is, and honestly, even when they were 13-3 the last couple of years, and you and I've had these conversations, and I'm always like, you don't know if the staff's any good at developing talent. You don't know if this draft and develop thing actually works because they haven't had to draft and develop in over a decade. And we'll see when this staff doesn't have a Hall of Fame quarterback, how they draft and develop, how they select their talent, and how they are actually able to make that talent rise to the absolute ceiling that they have from a genetic standpoint or behavioral standpoint. And right now, it kind of looks like everyone's a little bit shell-shocked and scrambling for answers.
It really does. And I think that's why I kind of always wanted to label this as an evaluation season, because we were always going to learn a ton about everyone, the head coach, the offense, the coordinators, the draft and develop, like you said, the front office. Like, it's just, you're going to learn a lot when you don't have that quarterback there anymore. And we're learning a lot right now. Unfortunately, not a lot of it's great at the moment. Hopefully it gets better. I wanted to talk to you specifically about the offensive line. And I think we can kind of skip Zach Tom because we've talked about him and what he's been able to bring to the team so far. And he's playing pretty darn good football. But I want to talk about the other 4 starters and just where you see them, obviously, with all the experience that you have. And if you think, A, are they capable, or B, like, what's the issue? Like, what's going on and how you kind of evaluate them. So let's start at left tackle. Okay. Let's go with Rasheed Walker. I think you posted something this week of like, there's a couple plays out there from a pass pro standpoint, look pretty good, but there's other times, obviously, it does not.
So the first 3 series in this game, and this is like Rasheed's fault. This is everybody's fault. I mean, ultimately the player has to figure it out, but he clearly can't get off on the snap count. And so there was all this talk. There's like one where he's getting forklifted by a guy who's, I think it was Brian Bryant. This guy who's not even a household name.
Yep.
And everyone's like, oh, he can't do this. He can't. It's like, dude, like if you're going like this and then seeing the ball snapped and then trying to jump backwards and go, that's really, really hard. And he's not very good at it. And he figured it out later in the game. And so he's more than capable of doing what needs to be done. But there's a theme with everybody except for Zach Tom, quite frankly, has really bad footwork on this team. And footwork wins in football. Basics win in football. The rest of all the other stuff, and like if you go on Instagram and someone's teaching the defensive lineman all these cool moves, sorry, Andy, and then the offensive linemen are learning like recovery techniques, bro. If you can get your body position and your hands right, or excuse me, your feet right, you don't lose in this league if you're a decent athlete. And so Rasheed Walker is a victim right now of not having good footwork. I'll just go down the line. Elgton Jenkins, second play of the game, Elgton Jenkins crosses over, which is a Cardinals sending offensive line play. He whiffs on a guy who is by all reputational standards is not his equal and gets beat. And that happens a lot in this game. Now, Elgton does a lot of good things too, because Elgton actually generally has really good footwork, particularly in double teams. So when you watch him like do play side doubles, B blocks, he sets that bumper, he sets that edge. He does a great job of staying square. And he gets movement. He gets to the second level. He wards off the line. So he does a lot of good stuff. But there are still too many plays where you'd say your footwork's failing you and you're too good a player to be doing that. And a lot of that is because it's allowed. And a lot of that is because in the new zone systems, on a lot of the play side plays that are really going to be bent backside, they allow the tackle definitely, and sometimes the guard, just to turn into a position block. And it's like if you allow yourself to create that habit of, oh, I can position block on this play, it doesn't matter. In other words, position block means I'm going to put my ass in the hole. I'm just going to turn my chest to the sideline and just hope he doesn't push me to compress me. And if you allow that to get in your brain that that's okay, you do it more often than not. Josh Myers loses in footwork 90% of the time. He steps directly behind himself when you don't gain leverage on your opponent. I mean, this sounds like to the listeners out there, I'm sorry this is boring, but this is really how football is won and lost. Yeah. If you step behind yourself, you automatically go into the next, like your next step. You go into contact, you go in high, you go in short, you go in out of position. That's why he loses. It's really simple. And he's doing it because he's being allowed to do it. In other words, there's very easy ways. If you put a rubber board behind Josh Myers' leg, he wouldn't step behind it anymore because he'd fall on his ass during practice. They don't do it. I mean, it's obvious they don't do it because he keeps having the same problem. And he loses most of the reps that we get like, oh, he's no good, are this exact same steps. Exact same. I mean, for the last 2 years. John Runyon Jr. The way that they're teaching a lot of the blocking schemes, they're allowing John Runyon Jr. Like, you ever watch Zach Martin?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, so Zach Martin like shuffles into everything, okay? And then he engages, and then he uses his 325-pound muscular body to move people out of the way because he's a genetic freak. And what we do sometimes is we say, Trent Williams is a good example. Larry Allen is a good example. Oh, look at how these genetic freaks block people. We should all block them that way. And that doesn't make any sense. I'll tell you a story real quick, Andy, if you have time.
Yeah, you bet.
My agent calls me one day. I probably told the story already, but we're about to play the San Francisco 49ers in the playoffs. Dana Stubblefield and Bryant Young. Yep. Dana's coming off Defensive Player of the Year like a couple of years before. My agent calls me and he goes, he's Dana's agent. And he goes, hey, if you want to know how to play Stubblefield, turn on the Dallas tape from this year. And I go, oh, okay. I turn on the Dallas tape.
Allen.
And Larry Allen's literally punching a hole through his chest to the point where Dana gets the flu and doesn't want to play anymore. Gets the Larry Allen flu. And I call my agent up again. I go, you never talk to me about football again. We can talk about contracts. I go, but I can't do what he's doing. And so, like, John Runyon Jr. is in the situation where, like, on a backside play, for example, when he's got Zach Tom does a great job of gaining leverage and doing a good job fitting and pushing. John's going sideways and shuffling into this, and like his second step's not gaining any ground. So when he hits, he's catching that defender. And so now you're catching the guy, and now you're trying to, he's pushing me back. Now I try to force and try to walk forward, and it doesn't work. And so there's just so many plays across the board where you just watch this team and go, this is a fundamental issue of you have average athletic for the NFL, you have average athletic talent, you don't have Superman out there, and you're trying to get by on average athletic talent with poor fundamentals in a system that is either condoning or teaching a certain way to execute that doesn't vibe with who you have on the field.
It's so interesting because I'm just thinking through things as you're saying this. And obviously, I'm privy to go to a lot of training camp practices. Now, 98% of what the Packers do at practice is not open to media. It doesn't happen at training camp. It happens all other places. But just as you're saying this, like every single time, and again, probably 5% of my time, maybe 10% of the time that I'm at practice is actually watching, not even that, probably is watching offensive line drills and watching what they're doing. But what I have watched, it seems to be more on waist up. It seems to be more focused on hands, waist up, where their hand placement is, what they're doing, like that stuff. I can't recall anything that I've seen working on footwork. Now, could I have missed it? 1,000,000%. Could that be the other 95% that they do and the media is not there? Sure.
Andy,
but I can't recall seeing it.
Andy, I watch multiple practices from multiple teams every week. Some of the drill, I call my guys and I go, I don't even understand how your team can tie their shoes. And I'm not like, listen, it's a really hard job.
Yep.
But if they ever just went down, if like line coach, if anybody in the coaching staff just went down to the strength room and asked the strength and conditioning coach, hey, what's the most important thing about being a good athlete? Like they'd go, oh, his footwork's got to be precise. His body position's got to be precise, because that then allows your hands to work. And what, again, we just talked, all these guys do is they work on these, they got the mitts out and they're doing these cute punches and you're going, doesn't matter. The foot's in the wrong spot. Like he's going to lose. He's going to lose. And you can't deliver power if your feet aren't in the ground. If you don't have a good relationship with the floor, you can't deliver power through your hips. I mean, all this stuff is like intuitive to anybody who likes to lift weights for a living or is really involved in movement. But the game has gone so into, it's like Matt LaFleur said, Coach LaFleur said a couple of weeks ago, there's nothing that scheme can't fix. Well, it's like you can't fix this with scheme. You got to just dumb it down and get better at the execution part.
And that leads to my next, what I think is probably a dumb question, but it's one that gets bandied about quite a bit, is that, all right, well, how should Green Bay line up their offensive linemen? Maybe the players aren't in the right spots. And my better take is all the things that you just said don't all of a sudden get better because Zach Tom is at center and somebody is somewhere else. It's like you're moving the same pieces around and they're still having the same fundamental issues. And unless you clean that stuff up, it probably isn't going to matter. Maybe it can be a little bit better, but it's probably not going to be a silver bullet. But at the same token, you're taking over the Packers offensive line for a day and you can line up the Packers offensive line left to right any way that you would like. How are you lining them up?
Oh, well, for a day, I'd leave them. But well, here's how I think about it. You'd say, okay, do the bodies that you have in the positions they're in, are they able to do the job? Like if you said to me, I'm going to put a 7-foot, 205-pound center at left guard, do you think he can play it? No, I don't think he can. Right? If I put a wide receiver at tackle, I don't think he play. But Rasheed Walker can play left tackle. He has the athleticism. He has the bend. He has the size. Zach Tom can play right tackle. Josh Myers can play center. John Runyon Jr. can play right guard. And Elgin Jenkins can probably play a number of those positions, as you know, Zach probably could as well. So I don't think, like, for me, it's not an issue of can they get the job done. It really is. I really, without bashing their process or anything, I think that they are not improving on the daily. I think a lot of it is what you just said. I even though you're only going over there for 5 or 10% of the practice, my guess is they're only at individual period for a short amount of time, and you're probably seeing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I'm just telling you, unfortunately, like there's a reason that there's really good offensive lines, and there's a reason that there's bad ones. And it very rarely has anything to do with the actual players. It has, or excuse me, the genetic talent of the players. It has everything to do with how they prepare.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think moving players around is going to be a solution to much. Like I said, maybe it can be small steps better. And I think at some point you might need to try some different things, but I think you're going to end up with the same results more often than not, just with the players that you have on this team right now. That brings me to the next question then is, we have all this stuff that's breaking down. The offensive line can't protect. They can't run block. Wide receivers are in the same spot as you mentioned earlier. The tight ends are all over the place. You don't have any level of consistency at all on this offense. And yet you're trying to gain the biggest thing I would argue the biggest thing for this season is A, progress, but also B, really getting a fair and true evaluation of Jordan Love. Mm-hmm. Does this team have any way of gaining a fair and true evaluation of Jordan Love with everything?
Yeah. Yes. I do think, well, listen, there's, CJ Stroud's down balling out for Houston. Yeah. And so everything's tied together, right, Andy? So when you say, are you evaluating Jordan Love? Well, who's evaluating him? Right? Are the people who if it's the people who are calling the plays, coaching him, coaching all these people around him, I don't know how much if you don't think anybody else is doing a good job, how do you trust their gauge of whether or not these guys are playing or how he's playing? Fair. Here's what I would say. We're about to play the Minnesota Vikings. Kirk Cousins is a great businessman, a pretty good quarterback, looked great last week, but is not a proven winner. And so he gets a lot of grief from a lot of people, myself included. If you watch just that one small sample size of one game and you say, okay, let's compare these quarterbacks, you would probably check all the athletic traits to Jordan Love, and you would check all the processing speed, all the standing in the pocket, and all the decision-making, all the pre-snap execution, everything else you would check in Kirk Cousins' box. And so this becomes the fundamental problem with football right now in the way that we have set up, the way that our coaching staffs get retained, the way that or hired, the way that the CBA doesn't allow these guys to spend time with their teams, and only a handful of them go out and find people to help them outside of the clubs. We fawn over athleticism, and they'll spend money to buy technology that measures, processing speed in quotes, but they don't really know how to look at that because they don't have experts that are in the field looking at it. And they don't spend a really good amount of time figuring out how to improve what really matters, like basic fundamentals of the position and decision making, which is processing speed and reps, and that's all it is. And we don't spend any time really doing that, and so I think it's really hard to evaluate Jordan Love outside of the context of what he's in right now. But inside of the context, I would say, is he making pre-snap reads at the level he's supposed to? I don't personally think he is, but I don't know, again, what he's hamstrung with as far as what he's allowed to do at the line of scrimmage. They're not even giving him the opportunity to throw in the middle of the field, which I thought was his strength. He hasn't connected on deep balls, but a lot of that, like the Romeo Doubs catch, like don't hold the red line, you're not going to catch a deep ball. It's stupid. Right? Yeah. If you run behind the safety or instead of front of them, it's not like those things aren't going to work. But if you look at just from pre-snap decision-making and then stressful situation decision-making, I think there's room for improvement, but I certainly don't think there's anything that makes me say, I don't want to pay him his fifth-year option. And I don't think there's anything that's telling me, I do want to pay him his fifth-year option. And without going too far into this, Andy, I think the real question is, like we talked about last week, my fifth question of the bye week, is this the staff to develop a young team that only has talent and doesn't really have anything else?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. And I think, as we talked about the last time we talked, I think that job description for Matt LaFleur was a whole heck of a lot different when he had Aaron Rodgers and trying to get him back on track playing at MVP level than it is right now with a complete team of unknowns and young players and inexperienced players, and trying to get them playing at the same level and with any level of consistency progress. It's a lot different job description than what he was initially brought in for. So we're going to learn a lot about Matt as well. And I think, again, it needs to be better all the way around. With Jordan, I love how Daniel Jeremiah and Charles Davis and those guys talk. They always say, I don't know if you listen to their podcast at all, but they always say like trucks or trailers for quarterbacks. You're either the truck and you're pulling everything behind you, or you're the trailer and the team has to kind of pull you. I think even in these situations where everything's not perfect, we're learning and I get it, it's really hard in your first year and your seventh, eighth start or whatever. I'm not saying he needs to be that yet. But if you want to be the guy that's the truck that's pulling everything, that's, kind of bringing the team with you, then you have to sort of survive some of all the chaos that's going on around you and sort of uplift everything else. I think he's had some of those opportunities to maybe do that in some of these times where he's had the ball at quarterback and go down and win the game, and some really impressive efforts against the Saints at the end and things like that. But I don't think it's certainly been consistent enough. I do think we've seen at times where in a little bit better conditions, go back to the Bears game when everything's kind of going a little bit more according to plan, looks a whole heck of a lot better. But then again, that you have to have the right conditions around you. So I'm not saying he can't get better. I'm not saying he can't improve, but right now it would lend me to believe he's more in that trailer side than the truck side.
Yeah. So the really interesting things for me would be, how does he act at practice when people make mistakes? How attention to detail are they in the practice field, in the meeting room? And how much is he demanding out of those guys? Because they are making a lot of mistakes, whether it's the specific route or how they're running the route, the pace they're running the route. But even if you look at the turnover, the interception in the Broncos game, they had a look they thought they were going to get. He made the decision to throw that ball before the ball was snapped. And the problem with that is Samari Torrey's running the route that Christian Watson should be running, I'm guessing, because Christian Watson got hurt the play before. I don't know that for a fact, but I know who I would put there.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right.
And he didn't really look off the backside safety when they didn't have an occupier for that zone. So the backside safety was 35 yards deep, and then sees him load up, and it's like, those plays are going to happen out of desperation. That's part of being a young quarterback. And it's easy for us to go like, well, he could have thrown the check down. He could blah, blah, blah. He could. Okay. I guess I would be interested to hear his thought process on that specific play after the fact. And what made you throw that ball, giving all the things I just said to be true in the moment, and those kind of things, sometimes you just have to break habits and change your mindset a little bit. And sometimes if they call a play that doesn't work because of the personnel or the situation, you just got to make the best of it. To your point.
No, I'm totally with you. Now he's going to get some more interesting conditions as he's set to face the Vikings this week, who are apt to bring quite a bit of pressure. I'm not sure how I feel about this because they haven't done well when there hasn't been pressure. And there's been 7 guys back on defense. So I'm really interested to see how Minnesota treats this. If they're just like, you know what, we don't even need to bring pressure in this game, so we're just going to do what is beating Green Bay every week anyway. Or if they're going to stick to their process and just be like, screw it, we're just going to bring the house, and we don't think they can do anything against that either. But either way, he's going to probably see some pressure throughout the course of this game. How does he deal with that? How does the Packers offense deal with that? And what are some of your keys to Packers Vikings this week?
Well, I think Flores is known to bring the heat, and this is his first, they're getting more used to this defense with this personnel group. And you look at the Minnesota Vikings right now. I was doing this morning. Okay, so they lose to Tampa, they lose to Philly, they lose to the Chargers. Okay, what are the commonalities there? They all have good quarterbacks and weapons deep, right? They all have all pro receivers. Okay, we're missing one of those. Then they go beat Carolina, who they should beat. They lose to Kansas City, who's got the best player on the planet. They beat Chicago, and they just beat San Francisco on a potentially concussed quarterback, right, with some guys missing as well. But then they got 5. The Minnesota Vikings got 5 games right now. They're going. If you're a fan of the Vikings, you're within their organization. You're like, we're going to go 5-0 the next 5 weeks. So if I'm Jordan Love and I'm thinking about this pressure, some of the things that you saw with Brock Purdy and the San Francisco 49ers, a couple big things with the Vikings is they're going to play pressure with a really soft zone, or they're going to play man, and they're going to show you. It's not you're not going to be surprised too often. Now, they might drop guys, but I'm saying when they're up, they're up. And so what you have to be able to do is the play needs to be made, the ball needs to be thrown when the wide receiver is within 5 or 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. It needs to be out decision so they can't rotate. They love, especially with Harrison Smith, They love the showing 2, going to 1, showing 1, going to 2. And I'm talking about single, double safeties. Harrison Smith likes to trap the backside. He loves to check down on the tackle. Obviously, Kittle had a big week last week, so that opened up Ayuk on the other side a lot of times because Harrison's peeking on the wrong side of the field. So there's things there where you're playing against a veteran who's an all-pro, and that matchup is going to be super interesting. But the Vikings do give you opportunities, whether it's by like the way cornerback plays leverage, whether he's playing off, but the out routes, some of the seam stuff, like the balls are there to be had. One thing that they said in that Vikings game, again, Vikings beat the San Francisco 49ers. That's a big deal. But one thing they were talking about constantly during the game was Brock Purdy's ability to kind of throw on time and throw and trust his routes. And his first interception was because, quite frankly, Juwan Jennings ran a double move when he shouldn't have, right? Yeah. So because they're throwing on time. Jordan Love, I don't know that he throws on time. And so how does that happen? I think with this game, Andy, for me, they have to find or they have to build in checks and options for him at the line of scrimmage. One example of that is last week, McCaffrey, they bring him across the motion when they got 9 men up. They run a bubble. It's 3-on-3, right? And he's one of the 3, so you feel pretty good about it. And he goes for 45 and a touchdown. Yeah. Those kind of plays happen immediately. You get the ball in your playmaker's hands. You get the ball out, and it happens while everybody's still at the line of scrimmage. So you're trying to really make them pay. And everyone thinks make them pay is like, let's take a shot. It's not let's take a shot because you're going to get beat up in the backfield. It's let's get the ball in our playmakers' hands and be satisfied picking up 5, picking up 7, picking up 10. And if they're able to do that, every once in a while, you're going to get a Christian Watson out. I mean, he did it last year. He's capable of doing it. We just haven't seen it this year because, quite frankly, we're not putting him in the position to be successful like we did at times with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, and going back, unfortunately, Green Bay's screen game has left a lot to be desired as well. So if you're looking to use some of that as a counter to some of Minnesota's pressure, it's going to have to be a whole heck of a lot better this week than it has in recent weeks, to say the least. All right.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the Vikings and the Niners, they kind of countered the screen game that was up on the one with Green Bay. Listen, if you double team a defensive tackle play side on a screen, everybody out there, you're going to lose. That's how the game's played. And this is what we're talking about from like that's not like a John Runyon Jr. or a Zach Tom problem. Like that's either being coached or being allowed. That's that problem. But you saw with the pressure on both sides, actually, from both teams, quick bubbles, quick screens, like the things are happening now, right? We're not waiting around. We're not doing our 2.5 count. Like get the ball out in your playmakers' hands to make plays.
Yeah, hopefully we can see a little bit more of that this week. Mike, before we get you out of here, one bonus question. Got to ask, you are back to being prime Mike Wahle, the best football Mike Wahle you've ever been, and Myles Garrett lines up across from you. What is your plan of attack?
So I've actually game planned Myles Garrett a lot. So Myles Garrett here's what I love about Myles Garrett. Like, first of all, he's the best defensive player in the league. I know Dallas Cowboys are a big brand, so we talk about Micah Parsons. It's not even close, guys. It's not even close. It's a joke. Okay. Myles Garrett his ability to use leverage is so great compared to his competitors that he really is a guy who is winning on his angle of departure off the line of scrimmage. He's winning on his angle towards the tackle, and he's winning on his ability to go from lateral to vertical or go from inside to outside and then bend better than anybody else. So a lot of guys, if you get on their inside shoulder and push them out and extend, you'll let him run the edge. He could just flip his hips better than anybody. So he wins because people take poor footwork and they get scared. They turn their shoulders to the sideline, and give him a 3-way go, and he just keeps beating you over and over and over. And the more scared you get, the worse sets you take, right? So people stop trusting their technique with him after like the second series. If I'm game planning for him, my game plan is you have to be the exact same guy every single set. You have to have that. You just trust that your stuff is good enough. You kick square for 3, hands inside, your body profile. You have a hip hinge. You see caffeine on my shirt. You don't see and kilos on the bottom. I'm not going to give you chest to hit. and I'm gonna force you to run out of options. So after Myles Garrett comes up field, he's looking at me like all you see is top of the helmet, top of the numbers and hands. I'm not giving you anything else to attack. And so now you can do your fake inside, step outside with a chop rip underneath, but now I can get my hand on the inside hip and push across. If he tries to rip through and come straight down, and he tries to come underneath with his right rip, right, I can flatten it out. And then what I'm hoping is 9 times out of 10 or 8 times out of 10, he's coming up field and he's just going to stutter and then bull and try to wipe off late. As good as he is at the bull rush, that is the best case scenario for most tackles, is if you can get him to bull rush you late because he's kind of running out of options at the top of the route, top of the set.
Is there a situation where you, as an offensive lineman, can do everything perfect and they just win and you just tip your cap and say, there's nothing else I could have done better than that?
Yeah. I mean, so listen, in a vacuum, if you did everything perfect, you'd never lose, but that's not reality. With a guy like that, the problem is like 2-inch difference in where your foot is, a 2-inch difference in where your hand is means you might lose that rep. Or if you don't get a good grip on him, he bats your hand away and all of a sudden, like there's so many things that can happen. And obviously if we're talking about clean pocket, quarterback's getting rid of the ball on time, like you actually have to lose. It's not one of those things where you're holding the ball 5 seconds. But yeah, you can do a lot of, I always look at it this way. And I've been working with guys for a long time now. And I've worked with some guys that are really high level and they've played guys like Myles Garrett many times. And when they take good sets, they don't lose. And when they take bad sets, they lose. Yeah. And it's some of the best names in the business. But if they take a bad set, you're going to get beat. The Danielle Hunter beat the right tackle for a sack this last weekend. The San Francisco 49ers.
Yep. The
right tackle set was so poor, it makes my skin crawl. I mean, he just jumps out. You're going, this guy's leading the league in sacks, and you're going to try to short. He's 265 and runs a 4.6, and you're fat and run a 5.6, and you're going to try to jump up at him. I mean, it makes the way that we teach. Some of these guys are teaching things makes absolutely no sense. And I mean, I guess it helps guys that do it right look better and separate themselves. But some of this stuff, you're like, man, stop giving away free reps, especially to guys like Danielle Hunter or Myles Garrett, because there's some really, really talented athletes out there.
There really are. There are some really, I mean, it is a golden age of some of the really fun pass rushers in the league with Garrett and Watt and Parsons and Aaron Donald and so many other ones. It's really fun to watch across the league. And the teams that have some of the Zach Martins and Trent Williams, how good was it? It was Trent Williams versus Myles Garrett a couple weeks ago, right?
Yeah, and if you watch that game, like the San Francisco 49ers offense is so much fun for offensive linemen because like there's not that many times he has to block him for very long. And Brock Purdy is the 3-step get rid of the ball guy. But even with that game, and Trent is amazing, right? But Trent's technique's not amazing. Trent's a Larry Allen. You know, he's an amazing athlete. So he does a lot of stuff. He gets away with stuff that you wouldn't believe. I've got a film roll of Trent versus Von Miller from like 2 years ago when he was playing for the Rams. And there's like 26 pass sets. And there's, Trent does his deep set 20 times, wins every time, no problem. He flat sets 4 or 5 times. He loses every single set. Like he turns his body. It's Trent Williams. And the ball gets out. He's not giving up sacks, all of that. But if you're watching it from my perspective, it's like, man, you just got beat. You just got opened up and all these things. And it's just because it doesn't matter how good you are. If your feet ain't right, you're not going to win.
It's crazy. It's really a perfect way to sum things up full circle of what is the Packers' issue up front, footwork, and what are the best of the best doing good footwork. What are the ones that are struggling doing not great footwork. Even the best, like Trent Williams, if his footwork's struggling, even he can get beat by players that even not Myles Garrett level if he doesn't have the right footwork. So a great way to kind of wrap things up. Mike, you are the absolute best. Thanks so much for doing this every single week. Always, always, always enjoy these conversations. Always learn something from these conversations. Tell everyone where we can find all of your other amazing work.
Yeah, I just came out with our Vikings preview today on the Process to Perform channel on YouTube. So please check that out. Give me comments, all that kind of stuff. Mike Wahle 68 on Twitter, Process to Perform on Instagram. And Andy, thanks a lot, man. Fun talking to you.
Yeah, I'll always appreciate it, Mike. Go follow him on Twitter at Mike Wahle 68. You can follow me at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.